Hey guys, Doug B here, your average axe-wielding hack. Welcome to part 2 of my interview with AustinBuddy. Now in part 1 we discussed his beginnings, how he hooked up with Dweezil Zappa, how he got together with Fractal, the differences between the Live Gold tone pack and the Naked Amps tone pack, and why his tone packs contain presets for more than just one modeler. So all right, let's get into part 2. Number 5, will your presets sound good through my rig? And by my rig, I mean, like in-ears, studio monitors, amp and cab, FRs, what have you. What can I do to tune your presets to my rig?
I get this a lot. And, the whole point is everybody has different systems.
Yep.
And it's impossible for someone like me sitting here. I don't have the money or the resources, the capital to test 20 different playback systems. It's impossible. What I try to do is I try and use my ATCs, which I think are the flattest, best FR type studio monitors. Again, this is what Eddie Kramer and Elliot Shiner and the mix guys, I went to NAMM 2020 and they recommended these to me. That's what they mix on. And so I try and make stuff sound good on that first, And as I said with Live Gold, I try and do it with the CLR, which I've heard a lot of FRs, and I just like the CLRs mainly because of how they handle the top end and the high mids, which is where I think some of the beauty of guitar is. I'm not saying the others aren't as good, but the Red Sound has a bottom end that I like almost better than the CLR, which is why I combine them. If you're using FRs, they're not all created equal is the first thing, and you'll see this on the forum. They say that they're supposed to be the same sound. No, they're
supposed to be the same.
They're not. They're not. Some of them are designed to try and give you an amp cab kind of thing, so it's got a bit of a boxy bottom or something like that. It'll depend on the speaker, different things like that. I'm a big fan of these new Red Sound MF10s. I think for the money, and they're really loud. If you want to play loud, they'll do loud, and they're very light. I'm still loving the CLRs. They're hard to get, but I still think they're the best I've heard so far. But a lot of people use some other things, and so the key is that you have this wonderful tool that our geniuses at Fractal developed called the Global Output. And you can go from global on your outputs on your units, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4, depending on whether you have an FM3 that has 2, FM9 has 3, the XFX3 has 4. You can go in each one of those and you can set up a curve that will affect all your presets. And that's how you fine tune your FR system to Fractal presets, my presets, or whatever. Usually what you're going to do in these deals is you're going to cut off everything that's under 70 hertz. I think 63 is the number. And I use the parametric EQ. You have a choice between a graphic and a parametric. Mm-hmm. I use the parametric EQ to do it. But that's how you tame the bottom end. You can just chop it off. So it doesn't matter what you put into it. It's going to say whatever it sees coming in, it's going to say, I'm not going to put anything under 70 hertz through these speakers. And that'll cut out any boominess or woofiness. And you can play with the number. It can be anywhere from 70 up to 100, honestly. And in live situation, your front of house guy, believe it or not, in a band is going to probably cut off stuff under 150.
Right. Yep.
That's where they'll go.
Cut that rumble.
Because that'll help. But the point is the guitar then sits in the mix because the bass is what's down here.
Yes.
And you don't want to be competing with the bass. That's where bass is living around 80 hertz, right? That's where bass loves. So, and then the other thing is how do you tame the high end? Because I think that this is the other thing about speakers and FR systems. They don't all handle the high end the same way, where they have the crossover in it, whether they have a coaxial speaker or they have a separate tweeter. Those are going to produce different sounds. And so doing a slope for the high end and finding out where that is, because this is a good secret for everybody to understand. Guitars meet is 150 to 500. Really nothing under 100. Your low E string technically is like an 82, but you're not really going to hear that.
You're right. Yeah.
So that's your meat. That's your thickness. All right. And then 50 up to about 1.2 is kind of that sort of mid definition stuff. And then everything kind of above that is sort of your extra definition and kind of the stuff that kind of punches through when you've got a snare and a cymbal and all these other things. You still can hear the guitar piece in addition to those notes. But most guitar speakers don't put out anything above 6.5K. kilohertz. They just don't, you know. I mean, so we've got things up to, you know, we have like 10,000 and we let everything pass through it, but there's not much up there that's not very, very bright. And in a mix, you wouldn't worry about that so much. So, you know, you can set that. I've had people set parametric EQs where everything under 3.3 starts to get cut off in a sort of a 6 dB slope or even a 12 dB slope. And they like that. And all the harsh is gone because there's no real high-end stuff. I tend to find that 4K range it depends on the amp. That can be really the difference between this amp sounds alive or this amp sounds dead. I mean, it gives you that extra air. You know, I used to boost it in amp models in prior editions. I don't have to do it anymore because the firmware is so good, and you know.
Right.
But some of the old firmware was a little darker somewhere at different times for me for certain amps that I was trying to pull something out of, and I just put a half a dB or a dB at 4K, and all of a sudden the amp would be there, and it'd be like, that's where it is. I don't have to do that anymore. You know, in fact, this new edition, I'm taking out the air that's in the cab block. I used to add a little air, 3% on everything, and I don't need to do that anymore either because the firmware's so good now. It just kind of nails it. So it's a long answer to a question about how do I tune this to my stuff, right? If you're using just a regular old amp and you're just going into the power amp section through your speaker, well, your speaker is going to define everything, right?
Right.
If you want it to sound like a Fender Tweed, you know, and that's a little tiny speaker and you're playing through a, 15-inch whatever, it's not going to sound exactly like it was designed to sound. It doesn't mean it will sound bad. It's just not going to sound, when I sat in a room and designed it, how it's supposed to sound. Yeah. But those things can work. And if you're like a metal guy and you're doing this stuff in 4x12s and all the amps you're using are 4x12s and you've got the speaker you like, it'll work. It'll work. You can just, bypass the cab modeling, go right into it. It'll play. So it really is. It's just there's not one answer to that. There's 10,000 guitar players and there could be 10,000 answers depending on what everybody's using. So usually when somebody says, everything sounds too bassy or too trebly, the first thing you find out is the wah on?
Yeah.
Because some people don't realize you got to have the pedal set, and if your pedal's already up, the wah's on. You're like, it sounds nasally. Yeah, well, check.
Oh,
make
this
sure
thing sounds horrible.
Yeah. So, but that's really the sort of the first thing you got to do is figure out how to tune it to that. And the beautiful thing about that output EQ too is that if you go into different venues and it doesn't sound right, you can kind of go in there and do little adjustments for the room you're in as well. There's a lot of pros will do that as well. So sorry for the long answer, but that's a question that really needs it. It really needs it. A lot of people, they want to make their stuff sound as good as they can on their own. In-ears, depends on the in-ears themselves. I don't dial in on the in-ears because to me, the ATCs are as good as I'm going to get. But most people who do this use this trick I just talked about and they can make it work. The other little trick I'd throw in there is that if everything's still sounding a little lifeless to you on your FR, just boost a little bit around 500K or maybe 800K, just a tiny bit, like literally less than a half a dB. All of a sudden,
yeah, don't slide it way up there. Just that little.
If you just do that, so you've cut off some of the bottom, right, and you cut off some of the top, and now you just lift that middle just a little bit, and it's going to sound like an amp in a room a lot more. It'll be present the way you want it to be, so that you cut through with your bandmates.
All right. Okay, let's see here. Number 6, the Brit Rock Royalty Pack. That's different from your other tone packs because it's going to replicate Jimmy Page's recorded tones rather than being used for a live setting. Is that correct? Can you talk some more about that?
That's right. Yeah. You don't want to buy that. I mean, if you're in a Zeppelin cover band, if you buy that, just remember that I'm recreating the sounds that come out of the speakers. I'm not recreating the amp that's in the room that's being recorded, you see? So it's the perfect for guitar karaoke for Zeppelin if you want to learn Zeppelin songs, right? Because you literally will go in Brit Rock Royalty, and it's the first 4 Zeppelin albums. And all I've done is, not all I've done, it was an incredible amount of work because it's not the same thing as just getting an amp to sound good. It is literally trying to narrow in exactly on what was the signal chain used, what were the settings on the guitar, the pickup of the guitar, the volume knob, the tone knob, and what is the compression and what is the PEQ at the board, which had a lot to do with a lot of how that sounds. It wasn't just what Page was in a room. They would EQ it to sort of fit what they wanted in the song. And I did this as a labor of love because I love Zeppelin, and best tones, of course, stuff that formed it. But I wanted to figure out how they did a lot of it. And the good news is there's enough information now, and there's some stem tracks on the web and things like that where you really can do it. But you got to have a great guitar to do it. I've got back of me a really good 1960 reissue Les Paul, which really kind of nails it. It's got the thin neck, and I got a great telly, just a really good telly. And I had some guys help me do this when I first did it, because I couldn't do it by myself. I couldn't play and then program. I had guys to play the songs behind me, and I would try and nail it in. But firmware changed from firmware 5 when I first developed it all the way up, and I had to redo everything. And actually, when I got the ATCs, these great studio monitor speakers, I heard stuff in there I'd never heard before. I even heard parts I'd never heard before. So it's a great thing if you love Zeppelin and you want to play with Zeppelin tracks through your home system, even if it's PAs or whatever. It's perfect for that, and everything's panned correctly. So you're playing out of the same speaker, the page is playing, and it's got every sound. So if you take something like Livin' Lovin' Maid, there's a 12-string sound, then there's a regular guitar sound on the other side. You could recreate your own, you could get Zeppelin backing tracks if you want, just recreate your own version of it while you're playing with it. But there's some great sounds in there, and you learn a lot about how he did some of the magic he did in the studio. And I'd love to do the next 3 albums, because Physical Graffiti's 2 albums, so it's really 4 to me. But it's just it takes a lot of time to do it, and I've got other projects I need to get done first. I know a lot of people really want this, and I do want to do it. It's not as popular as the other stuff that I'm doing. People kind of want to do their own sounds, but there are people that really love this the way I did, and so yeah, if you want to do Led Zeppelin karaoke with your guitar, this is the thing. This is the thing to get. Mr. Jimmy Sakurai, you may have heard of him. He's Japanese guy who plays with Jason Bonham in the Led Zeppelin Experience. He's a brilliant player in Japan. Through some friends there, we hooked up and he played them and he loved them, which was great. That was a validation for me, because he knows the stuff better than I ever will. And there are a few presets that are live presets in there from the early days. If you want to play the stuff live, the BBC, the Sweden show, How the West Was Won. When I get to the other stuff, I will do Madison Square Garden live and all that. But Doug, it's pretty cool. I know you haven't had a chance to check it out yet, but when you do, it's pretty cool. I think you're going to dig it. And there are a couple of cab IRs you have to put in there, because Page used the board a lot direct. And so you have to have a null cab, but use the preamp that's in there. For Black Dog is not an amp. A lot of people don't know that. Black Dog is literally, it's plugged into a board. It's just a straight. There's a lot of things you learn when you do this. You're like, this guy was really super, super creative. I mean, both in parts and in sounds, and pretty cool stuff. So it was a labor of love. I didn't, it's not as popular as the other stuff in terms of, selling and things like that. But it's so much fun for me to do it. And I had to recreate acoustic simulations to do the acoustic songs too on electric. So, you have to tune your guitar and all that, but you can use a telly and do the acoustic songs with it. For each one, there's a sound.
Yeah, I'm going to definitely have to get into that and try that out. Absolutely.
Oh, they're offline. I can tell you a few to go to first that'll blow your mind. Like Heartbreaker's pretty good. There are a couple that are just right on the money. Moby Dick. It's just that's so good. And then some of the 12-string stuff's pretty great too. Anyway.
So there you have it, guys. Part 2 of my 20 questions for AustinBuddy interview. Now you have an idea on how to tune his presets to your rig, and you know why the Brit Rock Royalty tone pack is different from all of his other tone packs. Next week, we'll be doing part 3 of this interview. Now, amongst other things, we'll be going over the gear that he uses to create those presets. You do not want to miss that. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. All right, guys, we will see you later.